Having car problems? Well, with Rhoda, getting them fixed is as easy as ordering takeout. They'll come pick up your car for free, do any repair or maintenance needed, and return it right to your driveway. They'll even give you a complimentary video inspection of your car so you can see what needs to be done. Perfect for those of us that maybe aren't so car savvy. Book your appointment online at roda.com. And lucky for you, CityCast listeners get a 20% discount on any service for up to $100 off. Just use the code CityCast20. Today on CityCast DC, how much impact does the president actually have on the district as a city, its culture and food scene and overall feel? As President Biden prepares to leave the White House, my co-host Michael Schaffer, who is also a Politico columnist, reflects on the ways that Biden shaped our city. Today's Thursday, January 16th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. So, Mike, we are talking about the ways that Biden has changed D.C.
That's going to be a short conversation.
Well, I read your Politico piece, and you don't actually think Biden made huge changes about D.C. as this place where we, work and live.
Right. And big picture, people in Washington, for some reason, we like to think, the Obama era was this, and the romance of the Kennedy era, that kind of thing. In fact, I think the person of the president has a lot less impact on D.C. than is usually written up. We sort of attribute our history. It's like rings on a tree or something, that we measure it in presidential eras. But in fact, a lot of the stuff that was going on here in the Clinton years continued into the Bush years and into the Obama years. And so this idea that, say, Obama made Washington cool, in fact, for people who lived here, I don't think a whole lot about their life changed moment to moment. And so in the Biden years, which I guess are coming to an end, the dominant factor in this place that you and me live and work and play began with COVID. And the nature of the sort of city economy did not change dramatically from what it had been on January 19th, 4 years ago. The major industry of the city, the federal government, people who seek to shape the federal government, hadn't really changed forms between Trump and Biden. Obviously, the leadership of that industry and the policies had changed quite a lot. But the sort of key to the city's economy was not particularly different, including in this way that the city government thought of as negative, which is that a lot of the people were working at home and weren't in spending their money at lunchtime. And Biden didn't do all that the city government wanted to change that.
Yeah, I have to say, something that you said a moment ago about kind of how it's really easy to talk about how, presidents really changed things. I was definitely somebody who would say, the Obama years felt differently in D.C. As I have gotten further away from that, I think that what I'm actually saying is that, I was a different person. I was in my 20s. I was more excited. I was more youthful and excitable person in D.C. So it was a very fun time for me personally to be in D.C. But looking back, how much of that actually had to do with who was in the White House? Maybe not so much.
Right. And I think there is there's also a long history of the sort of the shared civic memory of this place is created often by people who look back on their own, years of most aspirational living, right? People came here for the New Deal, and it was a huge thing. They were very engaged in their lives. And then, inevitably life goes on. But they write memoirs and remember the sort of magical, dynamic Washington that they experienced. People who came for the Reagan Revolution did the same thing. I mean, they might have lived in different neighborhoods than you do, but they had the same kind of we were in our 20s and the world was young and we felt dynamic and all that. Reagan was going to do a lot of the stuff Trump says he's going to do. They was going to cut the hell out of the federal government. They were going to make government less important. They were going to take the smile off the faces of a lot of these bureaucrats, that kind of threat. And in fact, the city, which had, like a lot of American cities, gone into really bad directions in the 70s, you could see the green shoots of its comeback starting in the 80s. And one of the things that happened was Reagan was outsourcing a lot of federal government work to private employers that paid better. And so there was a lot of new wealth. So there have been these kinds of turns, but they're not exactly what we expect. I just don't think there was a lot of that in the Biden period.
And how much of that do you think relates to sort of Biden coming into office promising like a normal vibe and being like, oh, it's going to be very boring, not a lot of big lightning rod moments? How much of it do you think is related to that?
As far as the hometown stuff goes, like were better restaurants opening or cooler apartments being built? I think very little. If you think of the presidency of the United States as like kind of two jobs, one is like being the prime minister, you're administering the federal government. And the other is this sort of weird, like democratically elected monarch role that we have in our Constitution. And that involves like grasping the public imagination and channeling their sense of who they are. That second thing is something Washington looks at a lot, right? And because so many people who live here work in government or work on influencing government, they want to take their leads from that. As a native, I always found it a little embarrassing that people would say, like, when LBJ was elected, everyone started serving barbecue. And it's like, do people in like London or Paris have to like take their cues from some schmuck who got themselves elected? But Biden, I think even by those standards of like the kind of American system of a elected monarch, I think chose to not try to like grab the public imagination. He was a normie. He was going to be boring. That was very much on purpose. And Washington, as much as people may sort of have appreciated that as a political ambition after the first Trump term, I think in their hearts of hearts, a lot of people who kind of work in government or on media in Washington were sort of disappointed in that.
What about the way that D.C. functions as like a company town? Did Biden make any big changes there?
Biden, maybe the most capital W Washington president of all time. He served 36 years in the Senate. He was vice president for 8 years. There's a whole generation of people who's like, weddings and first communions and stuff he's been to, even though during the Senate time he continued to live in Delaware. But despite that, there is no kind of Biden cast of characters the way that like Jimmy Carter brought all these people from Georgia with him. There's no, Biden hangout. And maybe it's because he was such a familiar figure that like he didn't kind of have that thing, the sense of like recreating the town in his image because he was already in its image.
Your piece really puts it in a really fascinating way where it's like, oh yeah, Kennedy brought all these Harvard whiz kids with him. Clinton brought all these like well-connected boomer energy with him. He didn't really have like a person or a type of person that he turned into a fixture because he was already sort of reflective of like a certain dynamic in DC. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And I mean, weirdly, the other president like that in my lifetime was George H.W. Bush, who was another guy who'd spent a lot of years in Washington jobs. But, the other thing with Biden is he was so old and, whatever we could say about his acuity and stuff, this other thing happens when you're old. Your friends are also old. And a lot of those friends were no longer looking for their buddy to give him a job because they were retired. So, the way that Clinton had this whole Rolodex of people who he was going to bring into positions of power because he thought they were terrific and smart and hardworking, there was a lot less reason for that to go on with Biden. Simply because a lot of them were kind of like he and John Kerry, right? They were peers in the Senate. But by the time Biden became president, Kerry was already in his 70s too, retired had been the Secretary of State already. He had this job in the Biden administration, but he was not like a star of the administration because it was a sort of like step down job.
When it's cold outside, there is nothing better than a warmly lit restaurant and a cozy 3-course meal. And Winter Restaurant Week makes that actually accessible. It's happening this year from Monday, January 27th through Sunday, February 2nd. There are more than 250 participating restaurants this year, spanning over 70 different cuisines. So I love going to Restaurant Week because it's a chance to try out places that otherwise might be a little out of my budget. And there's something both fancy and relaxing about sitting down to a meal where you just pick from a curated menu at the start and then just let the courses come to you. Participating restaurants are offering brunch and lunch for either $25 or $35 per person. Dinners range from $40 to $65. Some spots even have drink pairings, which is very much right up my alley. Visit rwdmv.com to see restaurant menus and make reservations. Metropolitan Washington Restaurant Week is presented by the Restaurant Association, Metropolitan Washington, and Events DC.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Go to Blinds.com for 40% off site-wide. Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Are there even spots that you think Biden kind of turned into a thing, or were his sort of hot spots in DC? Other presidents would be like, oh, I would saw, so-and-so from the administration down at such and such restaurant, or like the Trump Hotel was a mainstay.
Right.
Like, did Biden have spots like that in DC?
No, I mean, like Biden, look, he went to Holy Trinity Church, right? He would sometimes stop for bagels on the way back. There were sightings of Biden out and about. Obviously we're in a moment because of social media and phone cameras where if you're the president, no matter how much of a homebody you are, your every outing can be documented. Biden did not have a particularly large number of them. He tended to go to Delaware on a lot of weekends. But maybe because he wasn't new, it wasn't like, oh, our gang is going to all hang out at such and such place now, the way that had been quite typical in the past. The people he appointed to major jobs, they tended to either be very familiar figures or like the Secretary of State, Blinken, is always traveling, is a professional, is not a natural attention seeker who is going to be the kind of celebrity in our weird Washington way that would grab the city's attention and imagination. So we were in a situation where like Mayor Pete, who was Secretary of Transportation, which, no offense, is not one of the most important jobs in the cabinet. He's getting photographed around town like, oh, look at him. And then even like his husband and kids left, moved back to Michigan. So I don't think this matters really at all to whether your policies are good or bad. But as far as like we who live here, and part of the thing of living here has been treating these government big shots as our sort of cast of celebrities who we can gossip about or rage against or whatever. There was a lot less of that going on, a lot less grabbing of the imagination.
This is embarrassing to admit, but I read this celebrity gossip page called Demois, and they have a blind item like thing where that's like submitted, anybody can submit. And somebody once submitted a blind item about Biden, and it just said, Biden spotted in Washington, D.C. And the only thing anybody could say was like, yeah, that's a likely place for him to be. Like, nothing exciting about that. Checks out.
In the previous few presidencies, the political whiz who got the guy elected would go on to write a book and become sort of a media talking head and a big shot, like Karl Rove or David Axelrod. There wasn't really anything like that in Biden. The very few of the books about the Biden administration became bestsellers. Many of them flopped. There wasn't like Woodward and Bernstein were made famous by busting Nixon. There was no journalist scoop machine who made their reputation by taking a pound of flesh out of the president or his administration. The biggest outrage of this administration, his age, his apparent loss of mental acuity, that was not revealed to America by some like scoopster who would then become famous and spend 40 years on the Washington circuit. It was revealed to America when Biden did that debate. We all saw it for ourselves. This sounds so superficial, but the local kind of ecosystem of the dramatis personae of our city was not particularly grown by the Biden era, I think on purpose.
How does that compare to what we saw with Trump's last term and what we might be heading into with Trump's upcoming term?
Well, I mean, just think of how many people around Trump, like you as a person who didn't cover the Trump administration or, I don't suspect care for the Trump administration very much. Think of all the people you could have named. People talked about, Kellyanne Conway was here, Sebastian Gorka, Wilbur Ross, Mnuchin. and Louise Linton, his wife. I mean, these people were all like subjects of fascination, often appalled fascination, but fascination all the same. And that was like a part of the experience we had as people who lived here, which is, this is the scene. I don't think most people recall it as a good experience, but it was part of the experience of Washington. And this is over the history of the city. That is often part of like the day-to-day culture of the city is sort of this cast of stars who we know are just passing through, but for the moment seem to burn very bright.
I mean, in the Trump administration, even today, I feel like Scaramucci is still a meme. People still reference. There's nobody like that from the Biden administration.
No. And again, that mostly a good thing. I mean, like if you don't have bestsellers about you, well, most bestsellers about you, if you're a president or a politician, are either like somebody investigating bad stuff you did and breaking news with it, or some disgruntled aide writing a tell-all. So it's like, in theory, it's good to not have those things happen. But it, I think, also speaks to the kind of low hold Biden had on the public imagination. I did a column a couple years ago, I guess, about liberal merch. And, it's because I was at a store and I noticed all of the people on the novelty socks and stuff. It was like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, dead. Fauci, retired. Nancy Pelosi, semi-retired. All of the kind of stars of that firmament were no longer sort of at the top of their game. And, I think that was fairly telling about where Biden DC was, sometimes in good ways, sometimes not so good.
So are there things that Biden could have done to improve DC that he just didn't do, especially given that that he was president right after Trump's first term?
Again, we're talking about like capital W Washington, the federal city, not the hometown. But if you think of, he took over after January 6th, after the chaos of the Trump administration, 2 impeachments. And the closest comparison you probably can make in our history is after Watergate, when there was this enormous wave of reform that really, it changed politics, but it also for just a lot of regular people who work in government or who need to fill out like financial disclosures, stuff like that. It changed regular life for a lot of people. In the Biden era, he wasn't able to get that stuff through. There's people who say, well, if they'd worked harder at it, I don't know if that's true, but the Republicans in the Congress were implacably opposed. And so we're back in this situation now where the election that just passed felt like an existential danger, and where a lot of people in DC who have regular jobs in the federal government or around it are very scared for their own livelihood because of, who knows what these people may do. It'd be as if after Jimmy Carter, Nixon was elected again, and there had been no changes that would have like outlawed some of the stuff that was revealed in the Watergate scandal. Since I think the average permanent Washingtonian, not elected official who's coming in and out, but us who live here, do sort of see public service as an honorable kind of work and think government should be run by experts and should be accountable and should be uncorrupt and not treated as political lackeys. We learned in the first Trump era that the system that was keeping that from happening was not really based on law, but was based on a lot of social norms that could be violated. The fact that those social norms never got turned into laws, which I don't really blame Biden for, but it didn't happen. The fact that those social norms never got turned into laws mean that a lot of the things people in DC value are, again, going to be at a lot of risk.
Well, as we wrap up this chapter, are there any takeaways or lessons to be learned about what could have been done differently here?
At the end of season 46 of the United States of America. I think when Biden became president and the idea was, look, people are tired and people just want a president. You don't have to think about that often. That was true, but I think it sort of underestimates how much the superficial stuff you do to capture public imagination and be seen as the sort of embodiment of the country, how much that stuff actually helps you get real things done. We can all stipulate that, hey, it's sort of lame that those of us who live in D.C. spend our time gossiping about whether they saw the Treasury Secretary at Call Your Mother. But that kind of thing actually would have been useful to sort of bending institutions of Washington to your will that might have made it so that they were able to leave behind a stronger infrastructure that would keep us from having to worry now about whether like large numbers of our neighbors are about to be fired for political reasons.
Well, it is scary, fascinating stuff. Thank you so much for being here, Mike.
I'll see you at the end of season 47.
If we get another season. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, share it with a friend who won't stop talking about how fun the Obama years were. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.